Welcome to a Reddit Bytes production, the best Reddit channel on YouTube. If you subscribe right now, I will give you a cookie. If you don't, that's cool too. Enjoy the show. Today's Ask Reddit post. Former anti-vaxxers, what caused you to change your mind? I'll give you an historical one. In 1736 I lost one of my sons, a fine boy of 4 years old, by the smallpox, taken in the common way. I long regretted bitterly, and still regret that I had not given it to him by inoculation. This I mention for the sake of parents who omit that operation, on the supposition that they should never forgive themselves if a child died under it. My example showing that the regret may be the same either way and that, therefore, the safer should be chosen. Benjamin Franklin. I was a teenager and used to believe that if I got sick, my immune system would handle it and make me stronger. Like most youth, I believed I was invulnerable. I figured thousands of years of ancestors had survived without vaccines, and so could I. It was years before I realized that before vaccines, people didn't just heal the viruses away. Most of them died or were crippled by illness their whole lives. Edit. Surprisingly, I was a well-educated kid. I loved human biology and aced the test on the immune response. I still remember terms like macrophages and leukocytes. I knew how vaccines worked, yet despite this I had this flawed logic that if I got a full-strength illness, I'd develop a full-strength response. In my quest to grow stronger and find my limits, I would have dipped myself in every sickness known to man, giving myself a week or two to heal, until eventually I was immune to everything. God, I was dumb. I don't really know why I didn't like the idea of vaccines, but I didn't until my girlfriend had gotten pregnant and then I stepped on a rusty nail. Like the only way to stop tetanus is the vaccine. Edit. My girlfriend was pregnant and asked what I would do if my daughter picked up tetanus after I told her I stepped on rusty nail, was unaware how tetanus or really any vaccines work, if that gives an insight to anti-vaxxers. Not all but yet. My now wife was an anti-vaxxer. I generally go with what she says most of the time because I cannot be bothered to argue. However, when we were discussing getting married and having kids, I was surprised at how strongly I felt about. I was prepared to walk away from the love of my life rather than not vaccinate. I gave all of the reasons. I'm from a third world country and she is European. I have seen too much tea from a lack of vaccination program to sit on the fence on this. She came around. When our first was born he was quite ill. I don't think we were in danger of losing him, but just that tiny bit of danger reiterated the point of protecting them and others from illnesses. My wife is now more on top of the vaccination dates for our kids than I am. A friend of hers had a baby recently and expressed some anti-vaccination sentiments. My wife calmly told her that not only would she be putting her own kids in danger, but that she would be weaponizing her child against others. Quite a turnaround. Kind of boring, but I have a whack job grandmother who believes in all the pseudoscience health BS. Crystal healing, electromagnetic communications cause cancer, vaccines are bad, eat apricot pits to cure cancer, the whole 9 miles. When I was a kid she tried to teach me all of this stuff like it was gospel, and I believed her because I was a kid, and why would my grandmom be wrong about something? Unfortunately for her, the minute I turned like 7, I got a huge hyperfixation on biology and quickly learned that all the stuff she spouted was utter BS. I'm autistic, and I was like the stereotypical autistic kid where they just know a f-ton about one particular subject and devour any kind of learning material related to it they can get their hands on. I'm actually still like that, except now I can get a degree for it. It was not hard for me to realize that none of the things she believed made any sense, even as a kid. My ex-husband was a very controlling person and did not want our kids to get vaccines. I was always so scared knowing my kids had no protection. One day one of our kids scraped themselves on a fence and the school called me. I snapped and took them straight to an urgent care for a tetanus shot and just started secretly getting all my kids vaccines. We eventually divorced and now all my kids are fully caught up. I was a stereotypical, naturalistic vegan type. Didn't believe in essential oils or crystal healing or anything. Just believed, mistakenly, that you couldn't beat nature and that vaccines were messing around with my baby's natural immunity growth. I believed they were an unnecessary risk. I knew my decision was controversial, so I kept it quiet. I wouldn't have been out campaigning or splashing it all over social media. It was a private decision. I held off until he was 2. We don't routinely vaccinate for chickenpox here in the UK, so he got it, which is expected. However, he got a bacterial infection on top and had to spend a night in hospital. Nothing too traumatic, but I realized I didn't have the balls to play nature v medicine anymore. I met my Mill, who is the ultimate anti-vaxxer, and realized how f***ing crazy she sounds, and I didn't want to end up like that. Also, I have a baby daughter who I would like to live a long healthy life. Not me, but my cousin. She was extremely anti-vax for most of her life, and she refused to vaccinate her kids when they were born. But her second baby caught whooping cough, passed it to her first kid, and they both almost died. According to her, nearly losing her kids made her realize that she was an idiot for not vaccinating them. My mom is anti-vax, and I'm reminded every day of how annoying she is, because she's also against vaccines for COVID-19 and thinks that the whole rule about wearing face masks is to move America to Islamic rule with women covering their faces and everything. She's also hugely Islamophobic, and long story short, I hate being home. I wasn't really an anti-vaxxer by today's standard and definition, but back then I did question the validity of it. I used to wear my tinfoil hat back in the Facebook days and delved into some wacko shit like the usual Illuminati, lizard people, Hollow Moon and other shit. I guess after I grew apart from my friends who were also into all that, I gradually came back to reality and realized how dumb it all is. Edit. Found the dumbest video that my friend showed me when I was 15. Needless to say, I took this at face value and considered myself woke. Not me, but my nonna. She's always been into oils, healing rocks, potatoes and socks, all that weird shit. When I was sick, she would give me a bath and run her hand right above my skin, from head to toe, to draw out the sickness. When my youngest cousin was born, she practically moved into my aunt's house and went everywhere with them. When she took him to get his shots, my nonna started fussing with the pediatrician and he just talked. All he did was explain shit to her, and she finally understood how bad she sounded. She still firmly believes that my cat is gonna steal my firstborn's breath, but we're working on it. Edit. I never thought a little story about my nonna would get so much attention. LMAO. For those asking, she would cut a potato into slices and stick a slice in each of my socks when I was sick. In the morning they were supposed to be black, meaning they had drawn out whatever toxins were in my body. Well, after years of deluding myself into the belief that vaccines were evil, I finally hit the wall. I learned more about vaccines and why they were really necessary. I think it was my fear of the unknown that prevented me from seeing that science saves lives. I had a really good teacher in that regard, and it ended up being a pretty great time in my life. I mean, on top of realizing that shots weren't bad things, I started getting an allowance and my 10th birthday party was f***ing lit. I was caught into the anti-vax propaganda after my younger sister was said to have autism. Reddit helped me change my mind, with people providing evidence of anti-vax's stupidity. Edit. Thank you for my first award ever. I thought it would get lost in new comments. Love you all. I grew past the age of 12 and realized how stupid my parents have been. The research changed. I had my eldest shortly before Wakefield was debunked, when internet forums were way more common than Facebook and mommy blogs were all the rage a la Julia and Julia. It was also about the time the CDC proactively began removing thimerosal from vaccines, just in case the pediatricians didn't fight me on it. I met and married my husband and he was pro-vaccine. Wakefield was multi-disproved and we stared a delayed schedule. Then it came out that he was being paid for his results and he was developing a different measles vaccine. My next two were fully vaccinated on schedule. My mom and dad used to be anti-vaxxers until I was almost kicked out of the school I was accepted into for not having the required vaccinations. Back then this school was a really good school that was hard to get into, and my parents didn't want me to go to a normal school, and so they started googling until eventually they found out it wasn't what they thought it was. They originally thought, and kind of still do, vaccines were just mercury mixed with a virus along with mind control chemicals. I didn't like needles. Then my mom told me I could stay home from school the next day. I was 6. Literally had someone on Facebook tell me today that humans live too long as it is and that science shouldn't be trusted. My mum's cousin and his wife converted to Catholicism and became anti-vax. Their children nearly died from diphtheria. They got them vaccinated after that. No, I'm not saying Catholicism is inherently anti-vax, just how it happened in their family. I grew up and realized my mom was wrong thanks to my now hubs convincing me. I got many vaccines in college and I'm doing just fine. My mom gave us some vaccines like the tetanus vac, but that's about it. I was never anti-vaxxer, but I want to tell someone my story. I'm 14 right now. When I was little, I got some vaccines and I thought that it was enough. 2 years ago I looked into my documents and I realized that I didn't got like 15 vaccines. Then, I got mad at my mother, who always told me that I was vaccinated. She confessed that she also lied to my dad. We both were thinking I was safe. Luckily, after that my dad brought me to the doctor and now I'm fully vaccinated. Sorry for my bad English. Coronavirus. I've never feared for my life before. This pandemic made me realize what it would have been like in the days of polio. I joined the military very young, 17, and immediately thrown into a gauntlet of vaccines. It had some adverse effects with some of us. Short-term, mild effects. Later, when being deployed overseas I got another round along with what they called NARC, nerve agent antidote. The rumor mill and disinformation within my unit went in overdrive, basically suggesting that the NARC killed rats and not tested on humans, etc. etc. Basically, I hated and mistrusted the government and no one was going to stick that tea in my kid. Most of the medical community I interacted with were not the best at compassionately explaining the reality of the situation. I finally came across a really good pediatrician who treated his children and their parents like human beings, and he sat me down and spelled it all out in a way that did not belittle me. Not me, my mom refused to get me vaccinated against HPV, mainly because the news were covering stories about people getting sick from it. I explained to her that even if the vaccine made me a little sick, that would still be better than potentially getting cervical cancer. I then got the vaccine. A friend wasn't completely anti-vax, but had her first kid vaccinated slowly because of the mercury and all. Someone finally pointed out that the nasty stuff was like the sodium and chlorine in table salt. Deadly poisons by themselves, but harmless as presented. She said she would never have questioned vaccines if that had been explained in more vaccine posters and such. Instead they were just the disease is worse than mercury, which implied the mercury was still in a poisonous form. I'll note her kid was fully vaccinated before starting school of any kind. I realized that other anti-vaxxers were also into other absolutely batshit ideas. Flat earth, young earth creationism, essential oils, and general anti-science nonsense. Fortunately, I realized this while my oldest was still a small baby and we quickly caught her up to schedule. I was brainwashed by people I trusted as a teen. It took realizing THST someone who believes chemtrails are a thing, or that some dude took animals and dinosaurs onto a huge boat while a deity flooded the entire earth may not be a completely stable person. Realizing that I had to build a mountain of conspiracy theories in order to justify believing that vaccines don't work in light of the overwhelming evidence that they do. I was very skeptical of vaccinating until I found out it wasn't a German form of manscaping. For the record, I am not an anti-vaxxer, but I wanted to comment on another poster's story. As a child, I got most of the childhood diseases because they had yet to develop vaccines for them. We were among the first children to get a polio vaccine. For example, many years later, when I enrolled at a public university, I was required to show proof that I was immunized against these diseases. Since I had contracted some of them, it was fairly certain that I was immune to them. But I never had mumps. They are unpleasant for children, but dangerous for adults. I had the titer test done and it turned out that even though I never caught them, I was exposed just enough to develop the antibodies. The other author found that he had no antibodies to any of the childhood diseases. My point is that through the randomness of exposure, some people never get sick but develop immunity anyway. This is not a reliable way to develop immunity, since exposure to a live virus can easily result in an active case of the disease. Typically, a vaccine uses a weakened or dead version of the pathogen just to give the immune system something to recognize and develop antibodies against. So it would appear that many people were vaccinated without a needle. They won that particular lottery if they never developed any symptoms. It wasn't just one thing, and it didn't happen all at once. I was passionately anti-vax as a teenager, simply because my parents were, I suppose. I wasn't vaccinated as a child and wrote essays for school about the evils of vaccination, but I was also very clever and good at math and science. I did a science degree focusing in physics and mathematics, and I became passionate about other things and lost my anti-vaccine fervor. And I discovered that instead of there being two sides, the big pharma dupes and the enlightened thinkers, there were more. There were anti-vaxxers. There were people, very smart ones, who had considered anti-vax arguments and found them unpersuasive. And I learned how incredibly f***ing deadly measles is, and one day I realized that I'd completely changed my mind. I have friends that only changed their mind because it was mandatory to enroll their kids in a daycare when on a prolonged holiday. I don't understand people. You wouldn't take your new puppy outside without vaccinations. My dad used to talk at me for f***ing hours about how vaccines were full of dangerous chemicals, how they caused autism and how the government was using them as some kind of population control. He believes every word of it and so much more about other crazy shit. Then I googled what he told me. The 1,000 or so results dispelled his bullshit pretty quick. My daughter's severe dermatitis appeared right after her first vaccine. In retrospect, she already had mild symptoms before, but it took me a while to realize that. So when it was time for a new vaccine and her entire body was irritated, her pediatrician recommended to postpone vaccinations until she will see an improvement on her skin. For a while I was totally convinced that vaccines were bad and that side effects might be worse than the disease itself. So I was starting to consider refusing future vaccinations for a new mom severely sleep deprived. Being a part of a mom's group that's anti-vaxxers, anti-medication in general, holistic, pro-essential oils and all natural eco-bio-organic, sugar-free can be damaging AF. After a couple years and with my kid's skin condition getting better, I also got my brain back and could see things more logically. My friend had a sweet dog and refused to vaccinate, to much fanfare among our mutual friends. The dog died of parvo. That was how I started thinking for myself and looking into the risks versus benefits of vaccines. Not really answering the question, but in England it's part of the GCSE biology syllabus to learn about how vaccines work, so I don't know any anti-vaxxers, presumably because we're educated about vaccines. I do have a friend who just moved here from South Africa who's very anti-vax, and I'm trying to convert her. She's convinced they cause autism, even though I get the flu vaccine every year and don't have any trace of autism. Almost dying of whooping cough after having a baby. My whole family caught it. I coughed so hard I broke ribs. With a 2-year-old and new baby. We coughed for 2 years and had to do nebulizer breathing treatments on 3 people 4 times a day. The antibiotics for pink eye, ear infections that are complications of pertussis sent us into celiacs. Yeah, I wish we'd been vaccinated. I'm on the edge right now with it. I grew up a Mormon, which turned out to be a cult. They perpetuate a culture that believes in pseudoscience. They aren't all anti-vaxxers, but it creates the perfect environment for it. I vaccinated my first daughter up to her 12-month shots and stopped when I had my son. I have been terrified of how the vaccines will affect them, even though nothing ever happened with my daughter. My narcissistic mill is anti-vaxxers and scared the shit out of me. Once I was able to question my beliefs that I had grown up with, I've decided that it's time to start doing it now with everything in my life. I have plans to sit down and view the pro-vax side of things now. If anyone has any resources on hand for me to look at, I would really appreciate it. I can't get the whooping cough vaccine due to other health complications that I have. I rely on other people vaccinating their children and themselves to prevent the spread of diseases. To all other people cautious about getting vaccinated themselves or vaccinating their children, here is a John Oliver video explaining herd immunity and laying out the benefits of vaccines. Click here for video. Child of anti-vaxxers here, and I'm 31 now. When I was in college I got mumps and ended up giving it to both my brothers, and the girl I just started dating didn't get it. I've thought about that for the years but figured by now I didn't need vaccines. I actively got sick and was able to recover so I could power through anything else. I still actively supported children getting vaccines and just figured I'd hold off. The big thing that happened to change my mind was the lack of faith and trust in the medical and scientific community in the last couple years. I saw a commercial on TV for an at-home food allergy sensitivity test because their tagline was something like "Don't like the results from the doctor? Check with us and we'll give you the real results." I just snapped. I refuse to be technically associated with people who refuse science. I called the next day to my doctor to schedule MMR, flu, and one other. I know that vaccines are for me as much as they are for the people that can't get them, and if something happens to someone because of my ignorance or cavalier attitude I couldn't deal with that. My mom did all what she could to not vaccinate me and had even evidence for vax equals bad. My brother got vaccinated before and my mother was serious that this caused his pertussis. It took me long time to distrust her beliefs, and when I finally needed to decide what to do with my son, I read up a lot on that topic, and man, you can find a lot of information. Even conclusive bullshit, which gets correct numbers from the Paul Ehrlich Institute on vaccinations but put in a totally negative perspective. Nonetheless, I got me and my son vaccinated 2 years ago and we're both healthy and don't suffer any side effects. My cousin was an anti-vaxxer as a young hippie college student. She decided to go to nursing school a few years later, and shortly after starting school she vaccinated him. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but my parents were. They were new age types in the 70s 80s and I was never vaccinated. I was also denied medical treatment as a child to the point of it perhaps crossing into child endangerment, because they didn't believe in Western medicine, at least not when anything was wrong with me, which was often since I was very asthmatic and suffered from frequent bronchitis. I'm almost 40 now, and my kid is absolutely vaccinated and so am I. As a side note, neither of my parents lived a very long life and I was an orphan before 20. When I was living on my own in my teens, I made the vital discovery that doctors aren't the devil, and when you get sick you don't have to suffer for months. You can just go to a doctor and get real medicine and stop suffering pretty immediately. My husband was extremely anti-vaxxer throughout my pregnancy, but as soon as our daughter was born, it was a different story. I think after realizing that, holy crap, this is actually a human being who can get sick, the turntables turned. When it's right in front of your face, things change. She's had all her vaccinations. I am not anti-vax but have a genuine question for those that are or were. Why did you or do you hate people with autism so much? When I hear someone say they would rather their kid die of the measles or whooping cough rather than get autism, I cannot see that in any other way than they hate kids with autism and death is better option. What does everyone have against autism? When I was diagnosed with epilepsy, the medication really messed me up. I was young, middle school, high school, and coupled with some celebrity pills are bad rhetoric, I became anti-medicine and vaccinations. Even though I had like all of my vaccines, whenever I tried to talk about how bad I felt I was dismissed by everyone. I stopped taking my meds and saw a doctor who convinced me my epilepsy diagnosis was a lie and I was over-medicated for no reason. Ironically, the cure he gave me was a medication that is highly addictive. Then the seizures started again. I almost died. I saw good doctors who cared about how I felt and how the medications affected me. I realized all of my feelings and beliefs were because I had bad experiences, not because medicine was bad. I think a number of anti-vaxxers have also had really bad experiences and are angry and scared. It's hard because arguing with them is an attack and that makes them shut down. Bro, you actually watched the whole video. I'd give you a high five if I was a human. Make sure to click the like button and subscribe for more great content. See you next time.